We're going to keep moving along here. As John just mentioned, the second panel is going to focus on commercialization and competitiveness. It's going to be moderated by Courtney Gregoire, who is the director of the National Export Initiative at the Department of Commerce. In her capacity there, she's responsible for leading the ITA's implementation of the president's goal to double U.S. exports in the next 5 years and support 2 million U.S. jobs here at home. I will let Courtney introduce the rest of our great panel. And just one note on the Q&A, we can actually have mic runners bring the mics to many of you in your seats. So just raise your hands when we get to that part, and Courtney will call on you, and we'll do it that way. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Yes. Very glad to see Bruce. That was my remaining question about my panel. Well, as Andre mentioned, my role is to help implement the President's National Export Initiative. President Obama announced the National Export Initiative as part of his State of the Union, recognizing the critical role that exports play in our economic recovery and our long-term economic growth. And the Department of Commerce's International Trade Administration has a critical role to implement this initiative, including a team here in D.C. who's working on market access issues and trade enforcement around the clock. We have a domestic network and an international network that I'd like to build off the comments made in the last panel is really focused on navigating and helping U.S. companies navigate the export market. With 109 domestic offices in 48 states and 129 commercial officers in posts overseas, this team is dedicated to counseling companies through the export process and then helping them directly connect with foreign buyers and distributors overseas. Clean energy exports are clearly a critical component of achieving the President's goal of doubling exports. And as such, as you heard Secretary Locke mention, the International Trade Administration is leading an interagency effort to create a national renewable energy and energy efficiency export strategy that will provide both a first-of-its-kind assessment of the current export market for U.S. renewable energy and energy efficiency and a roadmap for doubling these markets in the next 5 years. Recent examples of clean energy trade promotion initiatives include Secretary Locke's trade mission to China and Indonesia, and a highly successful Bright Green Pavilion of U.S. clean energy companies at the Copenhagen Climate Conference. Acting on the President's mandate, the International Trade Administration has put in place an aggressive trade promotion agenda for the rest of this year, including a green IT mission to Mexico City in September and a trade mission to the Delhi International Renewable Energy Conference in October, led by Assistant Secretary Suresh Kumar. We will be planning events such as this throughout, of course, the National Export Initiative, and so I have to direct you to make sure that you're connected with our team to our website at trade.gov and keep up to date on trade events that are coming down the pike. Reaching the President's National Export Initiative goal requires efforts by both industry and government. President Obama has set a goal of the United States becoming the leading exporter of clean energy technologies. To achieve this goal, we're looking to our industry partners to work with us to identify trade barriers, policy barriers, and ways to improve the delivery of export promotion services, which is why forums like this are so useful. As part of our development of our strategy, we also issued a Federal Register notice calling on every interested party to seek to provide comments on where we should be focusing our attention when we're trying to double clean energy exports. If you have not provided comments yet, I strongly encourage you to do so. With that, I really want to introduce our panelists and get to a robust conversation today. Mr. Bruce Sohn is the president of First Solar, the largest solar manufacturer in the world based in Tempe, Arizona. Before joining First Solar, Mr. Sohn served as an executive at Intel and spent a lot of his career there. He also recently joined Secretary Locke on his clean energy trade mission to China, and I'll let Bruce tell you a little bit about their work going on in China right now. Marianne Wright is the Vice President of Global Technology and Innovation Accelerator for Johnson Controls, a Milwaukee-based clean energy company that provides power solutions, energy efficiency upgrades, and car batteries. Among Ms. Wright's many career accomplishments, she served as the chief engineer of the 2005 Ford Escape Hybrid, the industry's first full hybrid SUV. Steve Boltz, president and CEO of General Electric's Power and Water Unit that oversees GE's considerable renewable energy business, including its leadership in wind energy. Steve and GE were key partners with the Department of Commerce's Bright Green, the U.S. pavilion at the Copenhagen Climate Conference, showcasing U.S. clean energy technologies. I'd like each of our panelists to give introductory remarks. I may have a few questions to see if we can get going towards that goal of doubling exports, and then I'd really like to open it up to a robust Q&A from everyone here.
Thanks, Courtney. Given the twin imperatives for job creation and clean energy security, I'm really pleased and honored to have been invited to this panel today. Let me start by telling you a little bit about First Solar, and then I'm going to seek into what our experience has taught us about necessary conditions for innovation and international competitiveness. First Solar is the largest solar module manufacturer in the world, and not coincidentally, we are also the industry cost leader. In the last 5 years, we've grown our production more than 70-fold. We brought our cost of production down by over 2/3 to about 80 cents per watt today. We've built multi-year pipelines of business extending through 2013, totaling in excess of 5 gigawatts. And we have built the world's largest solar power plant engineering and construction business. In short, our unique technology has redefined the solar industry and established a new trajectory toward low cost, scale, and high performance. During that same time, First Solar has been an engine of economic development. Our employment increased from 200 to over 5,000 globally. We invested over $1.5 billion of our own money in new production capacity and technology development. And we've generated significant employment for other companies through the very long and very important solar value chain. First Solar's path to commercialization began with innovation, but accelerated because of effective government policies and access to key markets. A confluence of important events formed in 2004. Not only were we commercializing our product, but Germany passed a key piece of legislation that established a long-term viable market through price clarity and grid access. I'm a math guy, so when it comes to public policy to support renewables, let me suggest a very simple formula based on our experience. Transparency, longevity, and certainty equal economic investment and job creation. If we want the latter, we better create the former. Secretary Locke spoke of the familiar pattern of the last 40 years. When the price of fossil fuels soared, there's a flurry of interest in renewable and alternative energy. When prices recede, the enthusiasm melts away, along with policy support and private investment. It's different this time, though. Technology has advanced and is itself becoming a viable alternative to fossil fuels. There are compelling new environmental and security concerns to consider today, and other countries are playing leading roles. Renewables are becoming an economic sector in and of themselves, no longer a niche. America's global competitors took notice and are taking the necessary steps to attract and sustain the development of solar energy. While a decade ago, the U.S. made more than 40% of all solar panels, today our nation manufactures less than 10%. Germany led a few years ago. China is the leader today. The market has grown and the U.S. participation has shrunk. Sustainable solar markets have 4 key characteristics: high energy demand, strong public policy supporting renewables, visionaries to create that policy, a vibrant economy to transition to a green economy, and of course, in the case of solar, we need sun. Is that funny? A shortfall in one can be addressed by strength in the other 3. Germany, not exactly known as a nation of abundant sunshine, has quickly become the world's leader in solar development. It is our company's and the solar industry's largest market. A national commitment to accelerate solar energy usage drove the creation of strong public policy there. In 2007, virtually all of First Solar's product was shipped to Germany. Even today, about 90% is shipped outside the United States. Our Perrysburg, Ohio facility near Toledo, in one of the rustiest of belts, has expanded its production and research facilities and employs over 1,000 dedicated associates, but will ship less than 50% of its output to U.S. customers this year. Meanwhile, in Germany, renewable energy consumption increased significantly, and the German government reports that over 280,000 renewable energy jobs have been created since the feed-in tariff was adopted, and 53 billion tons of CO2 emissions have been avoided. Like many others, First Solar followed the market, and we now also manufacture in Germany. Without a growing and predictable domestic market, competitive incentive policies, and accessible export markets, the United States risks losing the global race for clean technology. Our brilliant innovation could yield manufacturing jobs and financial stability for other countries. This would be a shame. But opportunity knocks. Recent U.S. policies related to project financing, market development, and manufacturing, alongside export promotion policies and activities, are an important first step for the United States to re-enter the global race for solar and renewables. The combination of maturing state renewable portfolio standards and federal policies established under the 2009 American Recovery and Reinvestment Act mark an important inflection point in the development of the U.S. market. Specifically, several ARRA programs are making a difference. The Treasury Grant Program, the DOE Loan Guarantee Program, the Manufacturing Investment Tax Credit, and the Interior Department's Fast Track Initiative. While no substitute for a comprehensive energy policy, these bridging policies can help us reestablish U.S. leadership in clean energy technology. But they are just bridging. As a part of ARRA, they have or will sunset just as they are critically needed to attract investors for new development and manufacturing projects and bring clean energy generation projects online. Each of these programs helps to grow the U.S. market and attract investment and job creation and establish a foundation for exports. We appreciate the commitment and leadership by Congress and the administration to enact them and encourage Congress to extend them. The next and equally important step is ensuring access for these products and services to global markets, which is the focus of the President's National Export Initiative. There's little doubt that the potential for solar is huge. The latest Wall Street consensus predicts global demand of 12,000 megawatts in 2010, growing to 16,000 megawatts in 2011. To put that in context, only about 500 megawatts were installed in the United States last year. Small compared to the global economy, and frankly, a pittance compared to the energy produced by non-renewables. In May, I traveled as part of a delegation of U.S. businesses to China with Secretary Locke. China is making a significant commitment to renewable energy, and our company is willing and able to compete in China's market. Our dialogues with Chinese officials reaffirm the message that the U.S. wants to partner on clean technology deployment and that U.S. firms expect the same access to China's markets as China has to U.S. markets. In a free, fair, and open market, First Solar and other companies can win. Advancing these messages globally will complement a strong domestic energy policy. Photovoltaic technology presents the first viable opportunity to create not just a renewable technology, but a truly sustainable technology. The elegant simplicity of a solar array is that it just sits there quietly for 25 years, pumping out energy. No emissions, no greenhouse gases, no water consumption, no refueling. At the end of its useful life, we recycle it into the then current solar technology. Imagine doing this every 25 years in perpetuity. The U.S. created this technology and is an innovative leader. Let's lead in deployment, manufacturing, and export. Again, I thank you for inviting me and look forward to taking questions.
Okay. Before I do my opening remarks, is a gentleman who is the CEO of the super efficient ICE company, the one that asked about the materials. So that was a really good question, and being the leader of a battery company is something that we've done a lot of study into. First of all, the initial enticement around it was whether or not there was enough material supply. Once you got beyond that, then you started looking at, the friendliness or lack thereof of where these materials might be mined. So I'd like for you to take a little bit of heart that we have a very, very good champion in the administration by David Sandelow, the Undersecretary of the DOE, who has actually started an effort and asked for input from industry and from the scientific community to do the analysis, both in terms of supply, quality of supply, as well as looking at where all these materials for the entire value chain of vehicle electrification is coming from. So it is on the radar screen, and actually it's moving at a pace that I'm pretty encouraged that hopefully we're going to start getting some good effort behind. So it was a good question. You're welcome. So a little bit of background around Johnson Controls. We're a company that is really three distinct businesses. We have an automotive, which is automotive interiors, your seats and cockpits and stuff like that. We're the world's largest automotive supplier. We're all over the globe, supply most every OEM in the world. We also have a business called Building Efficiency, and that business is focused on solutions, products and services that, frankly, the best sort of energy efficiency is that we don't use. And so that's what we do, is go in and look at how we can make buildings run more efficiently so that we can drive down costs. And the good benefit is that we're having reduced impact on the environment. The third business we have is our Power Solutions, which is our battery business. Our traditional business is we're the world's largest lead-acid battery provider. So if you drive a car, pretty sure that when you open up the hood, it's a Johnson Controls battery under there. It may not say Johnson Controls, it may be another brand, but it's one that we make. The other side of our business in Power Solutions is advanced battery, and that's the business that I run. And we're very active in taking forward the revolution of the transportation industry to that of electrification, notwithstanding my great respect for internal combustion engines that frankly are going to have a lot of runway still. And I think internal combustion engines don't get enough credit given how clean and efficient they continue to be. And so there will be a portfolio of technologies that will allow us to motor around. But electrification is going to have a continuing, increasing role in the way that we move ourselves around. So, Courtney, as you're thinking about how we're going to export, I'm sitting here thinking, well, first we better create an industry from which we can export some stuff. And, the administration took a really good first step in the stimulus funding. Johnson Controls was the largest recipient of a grant. And our commitment, frankly, was to not just put a plant up and employ people and produce batteries, but to talk about the entire value chain that was going to be required to stand up an industry. So that's always all the way from these raw materials that go into the batteries, in the systems that are required to make the batteries, the equipment suppliers that, frankly, until now have existed largely in Asia, and then once the batteries are done in a vehicle, finding places for them to be used post-vehicle, and then ultimately closed-loop recycle so that we minimize any environmental impact. So it was a big, big commitment that we had made, and they had confidence that we would be able to do that. Good news is we're on track with the things that we said we'd do. Our plant will be up and running in August, and that's a year after we got our grant. So we're very excited. We will be the first ones that are out there producing. The second thing is we've been able to attract Asian raw material suppliers to the United States. And that's a big deal. I mean, because if you think about our value chain and where we want to create jobs, because this is about creating jobs, sustainable jobs, it's important to do that, but that's really half the job. We also have to create a domestic industry around the raw materials and the equipment suppliers. That's the third thing. When we sourced all the equipment for the plant that we're putting up in Holland, Michigan, with the exception of one piece of equipment that everybody in the world knows is not made here, everything was sourced in the United States. So we really did take our commitment seriously that we would help stand up this industry. So I was sitting like a bobblehead for the last hour listening to this panel because it just so resonates, this notion of innovation and enabling the industry to take off and be competitive so that we can start pushing our stuff over out our borders instead of in our borders. And a couple of things came to mind. One, notwithstanding my my admiration for the enthusiasm and the hopefulness of the administration that we're going to have a shortfall of battery capacity. We're a business that prides itself on making money, and our business model says that we're going to have a real issue in the short term with too much capacity and not enough demand. And if you think about wanting to sustain jobs, we're going to have to fill that gap. And I don't know if you read the Washington Post, but I was quoted in there as part of an article of President Obama doing a shovel groundbreaking ceremony for one of our competitors. I was quoted as saying, look, you know, great first step, but if we don't address the demand gap that we have and create a market, this is going to be a real problem. Now, we're pretty convinced that not all these battery manufacturers are going to survive because of the capital intensiveness, the ongoing research and development, and I absolutely agree with you. It is not going to come out of private industry to fund all of that, and the national labs are going to have to step up. But if we don't start looking at things like our own fleets and transitioning those to get a jump start on getting these factories up and running and driving our costs down because it is so capital intensive, we're going to have shuttered plants before too long. And this will be an investment that won't show a very good ROI. So there were some great points made about good first step. What's your follow-on strategy to ensure that we can continue this progress? I think, you know, my last point, because I don't want to totally bum everybody out, because we have great optimism for this industry and we're making significant investments. I mean, we will be putting billions of dollars of our own money in to make this industry go. And as a matter of fact, Courtney, we presently produce over in France, and we will be transitioning that production to this U.S. facility, then sending them out there. But we're not going to, we still need to have more of that demand. So there is the good news story. So I guess, you know, if we're going to be successful at the exporting, we got to really focus on getting our house in order here in the U.S. Those were my unprepared remarks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As the leader for GE's largest single industrial business, and based in Schenectady, New York, I can tell you it's an exciting time in the clean energy business. When I say Schenectady, New York, that's where Edison started the company over 100 years ago. I'd like to start today by expressing GE's support for President Obama's National Exports Initiative, and specifically applaud the administration's goal to double exports in the next 5 years. We believe that substantially increasing exports of clean energy technologies is critically important to achieving that goal. And I appreciate the opportunity to share some of our perspectives here from GE. I have 3 messages today. First, the foundation for successful clean energy exports starts with robust domestic demand. That's where it starts, robust domestic demand. Number 2, the U.S. needs urgently, which was discussed earlier, clear long-term policy incentives. And that's clean energy legislation. And 3, export competitiveness requires a commitment to competition, both here and abroad, which needs coordinated government assistance. I'd just like to share those perspectives and go through a couple thoughts. As GE, we provide our technology a quarter of the world's electricity today. With our eco-imagination commitment and our diverse portfolio of high-efficiency gas turbines, clean coal, wind, solar, biomass, nuclear, smart grid products, no company in the world offers as broad and deep offering of technologies for clean coal. As the leader of GE Power and Water, we operate in more than 140 countries, and our products employ more than 35,000 people within our business and 85,000 people across the energy businesses in GE. Just to give you a sense, we are also committed to U.S. jobs. This year alone, the General Electric Company has hired 6,500 people in the U.S. year to date. 1,350 of those are in our business alone, and 74% of those individuals are in either in engineering, manufacturing, or services roles. That 6,500 new jobs this year to GE in the U.S. is expected to double by the end of the year. So we are committed to the U.S. Now back to my three messages. The first one, we need robust domestic demand as a foundation. Now, let's look at the wind market. The wind market in 2009 was a record year, 10 gigawatts. And by the way, it benefited from production tax credits from the U.S. government, as well as a strong push bolstered by shovel-ready projects to be done by the end of the year. Very good. Let's enter 2010. The industry is currently looking at orders roughly half that of 2009. We know of a dozen European component suppliers eager to open manufacturing facilities in the U.S. right now, but won't until they see stable post-2012 policy. Number two, over 40,000 U.S. jobs for wind are at risk, as well as the industry's progress in increasing U.S. domestic content in wind turbines from 20 to 50%, which is already done. We need that long-term policy. Which brings me to the next area. Long-term policy incentives are needed. We don't have them today in the U.S. By the way, many countries in the world do have it. We heard a lot about China this morning. China's expecting to put in and has stated 100 gigawatts by 2020, 10 gigawatts a year. U.S. has announced only 5 to 6 gigawatts this year. China is pushing to make that number 150 gigawatts by 2020, and the European Union has stated 20% by 2020 for its renewable energy initiative. The U.S. needs that same long-term policy. That's a clean energy legislation, something like a certain percent by a certain time. Numbers have been talked about like 15% by 2015 or 20% by 2020. The other aspect of clean energy, it's not just wind. It's other pieces of clean energy technology. One example of such is high-efficient gas turbines. If we look at that alone, in some years, 80% of our gas turbines, which we manufacture in the U.S., go outside the U.S. Just to give you a sense, in 2009, $2.7 billion of trade surplus in the U.S. from gas turbines, the largest single area of trade surplus for clean energy. And we manufacture those in the United States. Now, we also have to look at clean coal, as well as incentives for new nuclear and the resurgence of the nuclear industry, where we're seeing around the world, U.S. government needs to lead that export promotion campaign, similar to what Korea, as well as France and Russia are doing. And by the way, GE is building 2 new plants, and I was in Taiwan 2 weeks ago touring one of them. My third point has to deal with, back to this issue of, is certain government coordinated assistance is needed for good competitive competition, not only in the U.S. but abroad. And there's some things that have to be taken in terms of providing additional domestic assistance for clean energy, things like manufacturing, tax credits, loan guarantees, financing, as well as working with other governments to ensure a fair global playing field, reducing tariffs, protecting international property rights. We applaud the efforts of Ambassador Kirk initiatives to eliminate tariffs on green products, and lastly, international standards, things like for the smart grid. So in conclusion, we need strong policies for the long term to build the domestic market as well as internationally being competitive, and there's some additional coordination that's required. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. I have one question for our panelists, and then I really want to open it up. I do want to note, I think Steve made a very good point on the need to make sure our export promotion campaign includes civil nuclear, and I should bring my best wishes from our Undersecretary Francisco Sanchez, our Undersecretary for International Trade, who happens to be flying back from a week trade mission in the Czech Republic and Slovakia dedicated to civil nuclear and the opportunities there that are coming on board. My one question, as we've heard, domestic competitiveness and domestic market demand are critical to the future for exports. But if I could ask you each to maybe identify one policy or regulatory change that you think would be the most important to change and allow for doubling of U.S. exports in the next 5 years. And I'm happy to let anyone start first, but Bruce, you happen to be sitting next to me.
Well, I'm not sure that you can say one. The challenge is that we really need, in our opinion, a comprehensive energy policy. So it's really hard to isolate it down into a single component. I mentioned, of course, the extension of some of the key credits and so forth that are available. But at some point, if we're going to deal with renewable energy, we got to get to the point of pricing carbon into our economy. So that would be on top of the key points that I made in my remarks.
Thank you.
Well, given that we export zero today, I could
We
make
can
a
double that?
battery and
No, I don't want to double
fly
that.
it over to France and double it. Frankly, this is going to be a tough one because and I'll just talk to advanced batteries, because that's the thing I do. But they don't really lend themselves that well to moving long distances, to be honest with you. Now, that's how they're done today. They come from Japan today, right, in Korea. I mean, that's where they come from. So, and people pay the high price. And that's why 2% of the people drive hybrid cars, is because economically they just don't work. For us, I'll just go back to this thing only works to the extent that the economics are sane and rational. I'm a math guy too. And they're going to have to be the same price as what people would make for a choice when they want to buy another mode of transportation. So if we can solve that, and the way we'll solve that is through driving domestic demand to drive that cost down, drive the innovation, drive the technology, drive the manufacturing efficiency, and we'll be exporting all day long. I mean, but we don't even have a baseline from which to build a strategy, Courtney. And it's a real shame, because as a result, the Asians have had a stranglehold on this entire industry. I lost my, second to last marriage, being the chief engineer of the Escape Hybrid, because I had to live in Japan to engineer all the components. So we've made some good moves to start being able to do that. Yes, I've had a lot of marriages. And they aren't all due to making cars. But we've made some good steps to start unleashing the intellectual capital and competence here in the United States and translating that into making stuff.
Thank you.
I'd go back to my point, Courtney, on clean energy standard. The U.S. needs urgently clean energy legislation. China's got it, Europe's got it, Australia's got it. The U.S. needs it, and it needs it now. And if I look at just some numbers that the Navigant Consulting Group has forecasted, in addition to protecting 40,000 jobs that exist in the U.S. today, they forecast creating 250,000 new jobs in the U.S. by 2020. So there's been a lot of discussion about clean energy legislation, but it's needed now. That's the single biggest important step we could take.
It's really difficult for us to demand others to buy our products if we aren't buying our products ourselves.
Yeah.
Well said. Can we open up for questions here? Uh-oh. Maybe we don't have this.
Come to you. Scott Sklar again from the Stellar Group. I thought all your comments were superb and absolutely correct. So the president put out an executive order in January, good one, that drives federal procurement. The U.S. government's the largest user of energy in the world and the largest owner of buildings in the world. And by the way, state and local governments combined aren't far behind. So we have government sector, which is a massive amount of users. And and since my business in many cases is working with the federal sector to buy these technologies, I know firsthand, it's anecdotal. They do a project here, they do a project there. How do you draw out and create the domestic demand for batteries and energy efficiency and renewables if you don't coordinate together between the agencies, which we say we're doing, but in practice we're not, between state and local governments? We have the federal marketing power administrations that wield power in the Northwest, the Southwest, and in the Southeast, which are federally owned, which could buy power. We don't need to get feed-in tariffs figured out. We could do it by fiat. So the question I believe our moderator first, who I'm sure has no power to answer this, but I would love some comments from the panel as well, is we can do things administratively as we try to drive correctly towards comprehensive energy legislation to drive demand in the next 1 to 5 years massively if we did some convening of federal agencies, state and local agencies, federal power authorities, and other big corporations that have similar eco-imagination ideas as GE, but on the buying side, to really drive demand impressively. And why somehow can't we get everybody in a room with OMB, who already has the rules and doesn't enforce them, to say, let's do it? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think it's a very strong point, and I have to go back to your first point, which is that the President did make a commitment to being a leader when we're talking about government procurement. How do we change inside first so that we can talk about changing the demand? I don't think I'm going to say anything that's not shocking. Interagency coordination is a day-in, day-out effort that we are working on, and you're right, we got to move it quicker, particularly in this field, because it goes back to the sense of urgency that we've all discussed. Do any of the panelists have thoughts on this?
Yeah, actually. So we have this wonderful mechanism with our energy savings in federal buildings called performance contracting. And basically what we do is we go in and we will audit a facility or a group of facilities and say, you know, if we do these upgrades, we can guarantee this savings over this period of time, and there's some financing mechanisms that can come along with that. Wouldn't it be clever if we could do something similar on the vehicle side, right? By saying, if we transition all of your gas guzzling vehicles into something with a portfolio of technologies, this investment above your base vehicle, and you can guarantee these savings. And oh, by the way, if you want to go to full electrification, guess what? We could tie that into buildings and efficiency and some renewables. And so it's something that's starting to get some traction. But I will tell you, I mean, Scott, you're right on. I mean, it's, well, not in my house, right? And Mark Wagner and I sat in with the Fed fleets, GSA, and several agencies, and we said, guys, the U.S. taxpayers made billions of dollars in investments to stand up industries, solar, new clean transportation. Shouldn't we leverage those investments by turning that into some demand? And what was the response? You want us to work together? It's a real problem.
Maybe just one thing I want to, it's a little tangent, but we invested over $1 billion in the last 7 years to build up our wind business globally. And the biggest part of that has been U.S. demand. However, I'm leaving on Sunday to go to Brazil because it's one of the biggest emerging markets now in the world. We currently provide the Brazilian wind market from wind turbines made in the U.S. I can tell you what the leaders in Brazil are going to tell me on Monday. Build them in Brazil. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what's going to happen. So the investments there, we need strong coordination. Brazil has long-term policy. It can take different forms. But with that right stable domestic demand, it drives long-term investment, like the $1 billion we've already invested.
I'm going to go just to the side of the room.
Hi, my name is Ed Wolbert. I'm president of Transco Products. We're a mid-sized manufacturer in the nuclear power sector, and I'm also vice chair on the Civil Nuclear Trade Advisory Committee, which advises the Department of Commerce on matters on nuclear trade. So I'm glad nuclear was mentioned. When I got up here, I thought, oh, I hope I'm not the only nuke guy in the room. But a couple areas of comment that I wanted to offer. One in the area of export control. The administration's obviously taken a big initiative to move towards revising its export control and really simplifying it, although primarily that's been in the area of munitions with, the Department of Commerce regulating, the normal stuff, and then under the ITAR for munitions. And the same sort of things exist for civil nuclear power and are in equal need of simplification. I can certainly tell you we've talked a lot this morning about China. It's very complicated to do export to nuclear power plants in China. It's done. We do it quite a bit. But it's very complicated on our side, and then even once you get past our side, just to get to their side. I will say it's the one place in China where a department is actually understaffed and under-budgeted is their department that provides the U.S. government with assurances on nuclear proliferation. But I would just encourage that if there's a way, the administration's already bit off a big task in trying to simplify export control on munitions, but certainly in the nuclear arena, it's equally as needed because DOE and the NRC, their processes are much more paper-driven. Commerce, I would applaud, does a great job with the BIS of what I call their traveling road shows where they're doing their export training. Those are, anybody that exports only under those, there's no excuse for violating export law because it's very clearly laid out. But I would make that comment about export control. The other area of trade promotion, I would give just by a quick story. China has maybe 3 or 4 events for nuclear trade that are pretty well attended. And at the biggest one in Beijing in March, countries that have nuclear businesses had pavilions that they put up. And France had a large pavilion, and you must know where I'm going with this.
I know where you're going with this.
All these countries had large pavilions. The U.S. did not, and therefore U.S. companies that participated were relegated to the pool, and several companies were wedged between guys selling toy helicopters and binoculars and pens, and there was no promotion. That's not Department of Commerce's fault by any means. I think why that happens is the systems, the reactors that are being sold into China, it's been decided who's doing them. Westinghouse got a big piece of it. The Chinese obviously have their own. The French have some. That part's already decided, so there's not really a big push, I think, on the big NSSS suppliers for new. The companies like mine, the mid and small size, there's a lot of things we sell. Most of what I sell in China, I sell to the Chinese plants. There's a huge market there, and particularly for the administration with their focus on jobs. I don't have data at hand, and maybe it's a guess, but I would guess that if the U.S. mid and small size manufacturers supplied everything they could to Chinese nuclear power plants, the number of American jobs created by that would probably outweigh the sale of a reactor by a U.S. company because there's a lot of aftermarket parts and services and things like that. So I would just encourage in some of these trade promotions events, again, in what I do with Syntac, I talk to Sarah Lopp all the time about that these promotion events, such as what the people are just coming back from, could be more, a bigger role for small, mid-sized companies, and even in the retrofit markets on nuclear power, because there's a lot of opportunity for U.S. companies in the small and mid-size sector to be able to do work even where the U.S. companies haven't been successful in selling reactors. So I would just offer those 2 comments.
Thank you. I think you hit the points correctly. I have little to add. The truth of the matter is the comment on the trade pavilion, the U.S. Trade Pavilion, and our presence overseas is very important to us, clearly for the National Export Initiative. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that when the President announced the National Export Initiative, he, of course, backed it up with resources, and that included a $78.5 million increase for the International Trade Administration, pretty important to an agency who hadn't seen an increase for 9 years. When we talk about the U.S. Pavilion, we do think we should be working towards a public-private partnership, because we're not going to be able to fund that whole piece as we want to. But we know our competitors out there are pushing and are elevating their pavilions, and we need to be doing the same, particularly in light of the National Export Initiative. I'm going to go to another question, if that makes sense. Yes.
My question is for Mary Ann, and there's a marriage here between wind and
Oh, you got to be
plug-in
careful with
hybrid.
that word.
Between wind and plug-in hybrid vehicles, and I like wind. I like the fuel cost, but it's very variable, and we need to double our load frequency control capability in the nation. I like plug-in hybrid vehicles, and we'll commit to 60 cents per gallon equivalent out of the PJM market today, and we're expecting a peak load of 130,000 megawatts today. We think we could handle 25 million plug-in hybrid vehicles. Most of the stimulus money has gone into battery and energy storage, and Bill Kapp and I just came from an energy storage conference in San Diego, has gone to manufacturing, and I think you're right. The manufacturing capability is going to get there before the markets. What can we do to incent the market? We're going to sign a letter today committing to putting 1,000 school buses to work in the summer. They would do load frequency control. They're parked at the same location. We've been working with the post office to try to get electrification of the postal fleet, and that they're parked every night at the same location, and we're working with GM and others. What can we do to build the markets to go with the manufacturing that you're moving from France to this country?
That's a great question, and actually the routes that you're taking in terms of looking at centralized fleets that have an easier solution relative to infrastructure installation, because if you have a central fueling point, it's much easier to look at the charging infrastructure and then the downstream, what's the renewables or what's the fuel source. So I think your route is exactly right. I think the best answer that I can give you right now is there's a piece of legislation that's going in for markup next week called the Vehicle Electrification, being sponsored by Senator Dorgan, and on the House side, Markey. And what they're trying to do, because I think this is really important, is the basis of this legislation is to drive mass adoption of vehicle electrification and the supporting infrastructure by concentrating in a finite number of deployment communities around the nation, so that you, one, can get the community rallied around it, you can put sufficient infrastructure in place so that you can, get some scale, and then you get enough vehicles, 50,000 to 100,000, which is, just an enormous amount of vehicles in our world, in a concentrated place to demonstrate how the model works, learn from it, and then be able to expand. So number one is we got to support this legislation and see it succeed. And it may not be perfect, but it's going to be damn good, because it's going to get us doing something and moving forward. Because that's what I've heard, is that we get funded, we do stuff. We don't get funded, we don't do stuff. So that's number one. Number two is we just have to work much more collaboratively as a value chain about going to the Postal Service, going to the federal fleet. And I'd be happy to chat with you afterwards, because we're trying to get some coalition effort in order to do that. So thank you.
Well, we got a short amount of time left, so I'm going to try to get to these 4 questions, but this is probably what we can do. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Rob Cogan from the National Electrical Contractors Association, and of course my members do business with all 3 of the companies that are represented on stage here. First, I want to voice my congratulations and support for this kind of a conference being put on. The Secretary should be congratulated for this. The point about the strong domestic market supporting exports, I think is a critical piece, and some of the things that we at the National Electrical Contractors Association are doing is increasing training in a lot of the energy solutions markets. We see this as a tremendous opportunity for electrical contractors. Our market looks to leap. I mean, it's so much larger than it was before. So I guess I would offer the idea that, you know, more collaboration between organizations. We're part of that supply chain. We're part of that value chain. We want to be an active participant in that chain, and we're working with some of the groups on solar transformation and solar industry, you know, training, installation training, those kinds of things. I just appreciate all what you've all brought this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, my name is Joe Batia, and I'm the president and CEO of American National Standards Institute, ANSI, and we work with all of you, and I think it's a wonderful exercise for us to focus on issues that are important for us to advance our cause. As you might suspect, my focus is going to be on standards and technology. As the U.S. member body to ISO and IEC and ITU, we facilitate technical dialogue among countries at the international level by representing the U.S. technology and the U.S. issues of interest. Right now, ANSI, through its participation from industry and government and other segments, is leading development of international protocols and standards in this area. As you can imagine, the transition from the laboratory to the marketplace is through standards. And we are leading right now in the area of liquid biofuels, fluid power, energy management, smart grid, power, and wind turbines. So my first question, I have two of them, is which other areas do you think collectively as a panel are areas for us to focus on that are not being covered now because they will suit our interest and our business objectives, because we can help move that ball forward? And my second question, let me ask it at the same time, is the use of nanotechnology in the applications in the clean energy and clean manufacturing area. A study at Rutgers University has indicated that the application of nanoparticles, especially in solar cells, hydrogen fuel cells, and batteries, can tremendously accelerate development of clean and efficient and cheap energy for application in manufacturing, homes, and transportation. So what do you think about that being advanced as a breakaway technology innovation in which U.S. can take the lead? So those two questions I would like to get your reaction on.
Maybe I'll just jump in on the first part of your question, which is I think you're focused in on the primary areas for standards right now around the world. Wind, smart grid, some of the others. The two I'd probably add to your list to think about are biomass. Particularly one of the gentlemen asked earlier about geothermal biomass, particularly across Indonesia. That's huge. And what does that mean to U.S.? Okay. There's a lot of things there. I think the second of which is how to do with next generation power conversion. Okay. When you get into intermittent sources of power like wind, how do you do that and do the power conversion and do it efficiently to the grid? I think those are two areas that right now there's not a lot of commonality in the standards around the world.
Thank you. I'll make a note of that. In fact, we have a GE person on our board, so you guys are involved.
I'm not sure I could add to your list, but I would state that it's real important that the standards that are created are open and non-proprietary. It's really critical that we don't somehow get locked into some set of global standards that inhibits our ability to grow. I would reinforce the comments in terms of grid management and communications across the grid, in addition to the grid efficiency, which is what I think you explicitly mentioned there. In terms of your comments on nanotechnology, I guess it's difficult to say at this point. There's a lot of press about how nanotechnology can probably provide benefits to almost anything when it comes to new products and new technologies and new processes and so forth. In some cases, that's panned out and it's proven to be very effective, and in other cases, it's not, or it's yet to be, I should say. And I think that over time, you'll see a lot of investment in those areas, and perhaps at some point in time, when they do become viable in terms of their performance and viable in terms of their cost effectiveness, then they'll become commercialized.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I guess what I would suggest is that we be coordinating with SAE on the energy storage, because there's a lot of work going on in that arena now.
That's great.
Hi, my name is Ming Zhang, and I'm the president of Movini G2 Architecture. First, I'm very happy to see quite a few familiar faces here through the Secretary transmission to China. However, I want to share one of my observations, because today we discussed a lot about clean energy, especially the generating of clean energy, the wind, the solar, which are also pretty persuasive, because we all know that China is kind of leading that side in terms of, at least in the production, the quantity of the products. And also, in order to be leading that area, I know, like this gentleman said, we had to be really make a huge action in terms of elevating our technologies, which is requires a lot of commitment and investment. But there's some other very broad area, because we have been working, besides the US, China become our second largest market. Through these many years, we have been observe a lot of different areas, which we think can create a much more job opportunities for US. And as everybody knows, the building industry really, number one, consumes over 40% of the energy. Number two, emit over 40% of the greenhouse gas. So besides generating of green power, but application of green power is a major area for improvement. And one of them is the building industry, the material. And this, from the design, which is the professional expert in the green and the sustainable design, which US constantly leading that market, and through the building material, because we like the Star Energy, all these products, and which in China is way behind. But just to give you some statistics, by 2015, they estimate China probably their construction square footage volume going to be equal to the whole rest of the world. So there's a huge market for US companies, especially related to the building industry. And so how are we able to prove this, to export more of this expertise? Just China alone will make, another two numbers are very interesting through the transmission. They showed us in Shanghai, the hottest profession jobs in China these days is architecture for overseas business. And in US, is one of the worst through the recession, because over 30% of the architects are unemployed. So, but there's a lot of experts in US who have a lot of green energy experience, sustainable design experience, especially in the medium and small size companies. They cannot afford to travel to China to explore the business. So how the US company, number one, can help those professionals and enter this kind of new markets? I think, there's many ways. I know US government have tax incentives and other things to help manufacturers. How to help the professionals to enter, explore their ideas, which is the most sustainable source. Second one is the building and material industries, because they just that's probably employs way more any employment opportunities than a lot of other industries. And just without even improve our technology for that area, we already have a very mature product, can able to export to other countries. So how the government can support that? A lot of times it's through the trade missions, through the negotiation on the policy and the trade agreement. So that really, if government can help that side, will be huge for the sustainable employment opportunities domestically. And so I just want to share that with how we upgrade our traditional industry, become more technology-oriented, green, sustainable products, and export to other countries.
I just want to build on one thing. I think your energy efficiency point is right on. Yeah. And I know drafts of a clean energy legislation that's being discussed in the U.S. include, if we're going to go to 15% renewable by 2015, let's say, I've heard numbers like 20 or 25% of that could come from energy efficiency. Mm-hmm. So I think your points there are right on.
Thank you. Can I get our final comment here?
Last but not least. I'm Dan Henry. I'm the Vice President and Chief Technical Officer for Hearth and Home Technologies. We're the largest manufacturer of solid fuel, clean burning, pellet appliance manufacturer in the nation. Actually, maybe in the world. We've heard very little bit about biomass. And I want to just talk a little bit about government policies and the importance of those that we've all heard, and that why the pellet industry was born in the United States. It was adopted in Europe, and it is now 100 times bigger there than it is here. And that we have recently seen policies in the state of Maine that will now let European pellet burning technology be imported that heretofore has not been, because their products weren't tested to the ASME boiler requirements. There's a wave where EN standards will be, products certified to EN standards will be allowed to be imported. What I would like to share is that the Pellet Fuel Institute, which I'm a board member of, estimates that we have about 1.3 million homes heated with pellet stoves today. They're extremely clean burning. They're carbon neutral. There's an initiative here that President Obama has created to increase the export of renewable energy. And knowing I was coming to this meeting, I thought the only renewable energy that I'm aware of that we're actually exporting in the form of energy is densified fuel in the form of pellets to the tune of about 4 million tons last year. You combine that with about 6 million out of Canada. From North America, there's 10 million tons annually going to Europe. That's a pretty significant contribution in BTU value. Policies that allowed this technology to expand in Europe is what drove the market. And policy that has been lacking in our country is what has hindered the market. Now, the fact that we've sold 1,300,000 pellet stoves in our country, and we're heating 1,300,000 homes with those pellet stoves in our country, was done without the assistance of any policy or tax credits. It was purely as the result of economics. The consumer bought the stove to save money on their annual heating bill. And there was an ROI on their investment of about 3 years, and then they were money ahead every year after that. So the opportunity and the potential for biomass in our country is huge. And the USDA, U.S. Forest Service, estimate they have 365 million bone-dried tons annually sustainable that would create healthy forest, wildfire mitigation, and improve growth in the standing forest, and that's enough biomass, densified biomass, to cleanly heat every home in our nation. And we do have an opportunity to start exporting more of it, and I think we need to, because it will create an awareness. But I also think that we need to make sure that if we need it, we don't have to keep exporting it. They've done it to achieve Kyoto Treaty carbon emission compliance. They've done it to reduce their dependency on fossil fuel. We need to have those policies so that we as a country can follow in suit and reduce our dependency on fossil fuel, imported energy, and our carbon footprint.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're running a little over, and I want to thank our panelists and thank everyone here for a robust conversation. You know, I think everyone came forward with some themes, so it's hard for me to crystallize. But if I thought of three, first and foremost, I think we've had a good, robust conversation about the opportunity. The global demand for energy means there's a tremendous opportunity for us here. What I also heard second is a call for collaboration. Panel one, we heard from university to the private sector, how that can move us forward. I heard a call for collaboration better across the federal government, between federal and state partners, and throughout the supply chain, which is the partnerships that can be made here. And third, what struck a bell for me, of course, is the need for a robust domestic market as key to our future in this sector and the key to export opportunities. But we get there through comprehensive climate change legislation. And as Secretary Locke put it, for the need for certainty in the future. that's our call. So I want to thank everyone here and encourage these conversations to keep happening. Of course, I'm available if you ever want to talk about exporting, and our whole team is ready to help you and support you do that. So thank you.
Thank you.